Welcome to Well Good Movies, the podcast that gives you the movies well worth watching, even if there are some duds along the way. Combining questions, trivia, and games, every episode we're challenged to watch a piece of film history to decide whether it deserves to be remembered for all time in our movie vault. With every film chosen in our previous episode, it's the perfect way to watch and discuss along at home. But don't just take my word for it. Here's a snippet of what to expect in today's episode.
There's a beautiful ambiguity to this movie at the end. And I think modern film viewers, God, I'm generalizing. I'm really bashing modern film viewers today.
Nah, screw them, they're dicks.
You're all awful. You suck.
They're all Amy Schumers.
Right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Are you not entertained? Great Scott! I'll be back. Here's Johnny. You're a wizard, Harry.
They call me Mr. Tibbs.
I'm Batman.
And beyond.
Oh, hi, Mark. Well, good movies.
Hello and welcome to Well Good Movies, the podcast that gives you the movies well worth watching, even if there are some duds along the way. I'm your host, David Osger, and I'm joined by the sensei of facts and challenges, Craig MacDonald. Hello, Craig.
Hello, my son.
Just as well you were like teaching me Japanese earlier, I can understand that a bit more now.
I said my son. What do you not understand about familial relationships?
Well, you said san earlier, so that's what's confusing me.
That implies that I respect you.
None of that here. So, as we alluded to there, Craig, we talk about movies well worth watching, despite duds along the way. So, just to tease the audience at home, do you think today's movie is a dud or well worth watching?
Oh, it's definitely well worth watching.
Awesome. Well, can't wait to talk about it. It was a fun episode last time, and it's going to be another fun one today as we're talking about anime again. So, can you catch us up on the previous episode and how we got to talk about today's film?
So last week we ended up discussing Akira, and we talked about a lot about the legacy of that film, as well as various attempts for Japanese media to come over to the West. So with the Endgame, I tried to bring the West to Japan, talking about the films that often get rebranded over in Japan with hilarious consequence names, such as Napoleon Dynamite becoming Busman, as an example. In the end, one of our guests, Steph Lorakis, was the winner of that Endgame. And they decided to continue the anime train, looking at specifically one of the most successful films to come out of Japan with Your Name.
Your Name?
David. Don't make this a thing.
Okay, cool. Well,
yeah, the awkward silence there where you're just like,
I can't make the joke. What do I do? Well, we look forward to discussing Your Name from 2016 and undertaking our usual task of deciding whether it goes into the movie vault, our vault of movies that celebrates chosen films for all time. But before all of that, we have a new guest joining us today on Well Good Movies to talk with us all about Your Name. Not Your Name, Craig. I'm just talking about the film.
yeah, get on with it.
So, yes, talking to us today is writer of articles, novels, and screenplays, Sarah Cook. Hello, Sarah.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you, Sarah. Thank you for joining us. So, please tell us about yourself. What is it you do? What is your links to the world of film and movies?
I've been a marketing manager for film companies, cinemas, for about 6 years, and now I'm currently working in the UK Jewish Film Festival doing their digital marketing. And I've been writing about film for about 8 years, and I try and write and make films in my spare time. So I basically live in the world of film.
Yeah, that's always the fun thing with sort of film creatives or film journalists. There's always that overlap, isn't it? So it's never quite one thing, which is always fun as well, especially when you're talking about them, reviewing them. You know, you've got that knowledge because you can say, well, I've made them as well, so I know how difficult this is, or, you know, what challenges you come across, etc. So what are some of the examples of some of the stuff that you write or that you work on?
I think genuinely writing is, when you start writing films, you kind of think that your first draft's going to be like the one. And actually, it takes like 100 drafts. I mean, there's never like a finished screenplay, I think, is the big takeaway. And it's always constantly. I once had an argument with an actor because she wanted everything like really precise, and I was like, there is never a finished screenplay. It always constantly changes because things happen on sets, things happen with budgets. So I think I'm always more lenient to when there's production problems because it's always constantly changing.
Yeah, I guess it comes down to the whole, the film comes together in the editing room idea as well, isn't it? It's that's when the film is kind of really created. And when you look at deleted scenes or original scripts, you're like, wow, that's so different to the end product. But yeah, I definitely know what you mean in terms of, like I always enjoy it when actors are able to sort of riff on set or just do variations. When you hear about the actors who do it exactly the same way every time, I get a bit spooked by it. I'm a bit like, oh, I'm not sure if I would enjoy that. But, if they're a big Hollywood actor, then I'm like, I probably wouldn't say anything about it because it's obviously, Marlon Brando, whoever it is. But yeah, I think I would appreciate the more sort of like changing it up approach. Yeah. But what about your sort of like journalistic sort of writing? Obviously you do things for places like Film Stories and sort of review sort of stuff. What kind of stuff have you worked on in that respect?
Yeah, so I do a column at Film Stories that looks at old movies in particular, really old movies from silent films in the pre-code era. I'm really big on my pre-code Hollywood, which is a time between 1929 and 1934 where they weren't enforcing censorship as much as they did after 1934. So the films really look at social issues. They're anti-war. They deal with alcoholism. They deal with depression, and they're risque. They're sexy, and they've got these really like headstrong women and well-written characters. So I tend to write all about that kind of period in cinema, as well as like the really classic 1890s silent films that I love, because the Victorians invented cinema and I love the Victorians as well.
It's kind of unfortunate to think of it in that way as well, isn't it? Of being like, oh, they were really like cutting edge, they had great female characters, as if then like, oh, that censorship changed all of that. And it's like, oh, so really,
yeah, it's always the case with cinema that they get really progressive and they get really like, they send messages and then moralists come in. And they're like, oh no, we can't be showing alcohol on screen, and we've got to put the couples in two separate beds.
Yeah, but to sort of get an idea of like, some of your favorite films then, and what kind of cinema you enjoy, we have here the Movie Vault, where we sort of preserve movies for all time. So Sarah, if you were to put in one of your favorite films into the Movie Vault, what is the movie you would choose?
It would be Ruben Mamoulian's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde from 1931. Yeah, absolutely. One of the best pre-code horrors, if not horror, of all time, starring Frederick March. I don't really need to tell you what the story is about, right? Because it's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. But I would advise to seek it out. It's a very inventive and it's kind of I think it's the quintessential depiction on cinema of Robert Louis Stevenson's tale, and really tackles the kind of repression of the Victorian society that kinds of births Hyde. And Frederick March won the Academy Award for it, and he's my favourite actor. So yeah, I would slip that in. I always tell people that's the one. If they want to get into pre-code, that's the one they should start watching. Nice.
Have you had the chance to talk about it in your column at all?
Yes. Many times. There is a whole, if you see my column, there's a whole piece dedicated to Jekyll and Hyde. There's also a whole piece dedicated to as many Jekyll and Hyde adaptations as possible, because I'm a huge Jekyll and Hyde fan. I've seen about 30 versions of the tale on screen. And I also really love the musical by Frank Wildhorn, and I really love the story. And I have a cat called Jekyll. So if you do want to mosey on down the world of Jekyll and Hyde, then I do have lots of columns about that.
So yeah, and let's go on to our main discussion today then. And today's film, which as we mentioned at the top, is Your Name from 2016. Original title, Kimi no Na wa. It is obviously a Japanese anime. And this follows two strangers who find themselves linked in a bizarre way. When a connection forms, will distance be the only thing to keep them apart? It's almost, I'm teasing the audience there. If you haven't watched it, go find out. So this is directed by Makoto Shinkai, and he also wrote the film, and it's based slightly off like a novel which was released sort of coinciding with the film's release. In this, in terms of cast, we got Ryonosuke Kamiki as Taki. You got Mon Kamishirashi as Mitsuha. Ryo Narita as Katsuhiko. Ai Yuki as Sayaka. And this is the moment in which Craig lambasts me for all of those names.
No, I was just going to say, Steph, buddy, if you're listening, if you thought my Japanese was bad, which it wasn't, it was great. What on earth was that? He practiced this with me earlier. He asked me for pronunciations. I gave them.
I went one by one then. I was like, go in there and I was like...
You went proper like British tourist on it.
Yeah.
You're just like, what?
Can you tell me where this is, please? Yeah, I'm like, essentially when you go to the Italian restaurant and I like point at something like, I'll have that. And they're like, oh yes, the da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, yeah. So yeah, this is a very famous anime, as we discussed last time. We were talking about Akira. This is another one that sort of shows up a lot in your kind of like top 10 animes, great anime or animated films from the past sort of 10 years. Very striking visuals. The poster to me has always stood out, but this was a first watch for me. I know it was the same for Craig. So when Stefanos mentioned it last week, it was a great chance for us to kind of like go discover this film. But Sarah, you would sort of experienced this film before, and it's actually one of your favorites. So what's your experience with Your Name?
Oh, I kind of like, so when I first watched Your Name, I watched it in this pokey screening room at the bottom of this hotel in London, where if this guy moved, I wouldn't have seen any of the subtitles, and I fell in love with it. Like, even from the opening, it's got quite a boisterous opening, I think, for what happens in the movie. But then I watched it in the IMAX,
Oh, wow.
and I've never been the same since, I guess. It's just a beautiful, wonderfully made animated film that has so many twists and turns, and you won't be able to guess them at the beginning. And it's just, yeah, I love this film, and I talk about this all the time. Yeah, it's gorgeous.
So is it one that you sort of recommend a lot when people sort of say about anime, or is it just generally when animation comes up, as you were saying there?
Not even just anime, just in general of good films that have come out recently, in the past 6 years, 5 years. But yeah, obviously anime is probably the one that I'd go to. Do you know when you're trying to talk about anime, but you're not trying to talk about Studio Ghibli?
Yeah.
Because everyone's like, oh, there's Ghibli. It's like, yeah, but there's other animes. And you're like, Your Name, for example. When it came out over here, it was genuinely probably top 2, top 3 films of that year. Just because the story and its animation alone is just God level. God, I can't talk very gushing about this film. I will recommend this all the time, especially if people want to get into anime, and it kind of has that kind of live actiony feel to it as well.
Yeah, I think, and that's where we've been lucky as well, is that we've had so many favorites and big films come up recently. Is there a lot, we've had a lot of these films that people have, got these great connections with and have been favorites for years, which is, really fascinating. And yeah, definitely, as you said, the visuals were one that stood out to me, but also something that was mentioned in the last episode. As much as Akira is kind of this crazy, mad science fiction film, that there is that side of anime, and because there's the subgenres of anime, you can have all different types, whether it be within the television space or whether it be in films. It's something that I've appreciated when I have watched, the likes of Studio Ghibli or other studios, is that there can be that kind of more live action approach to it, in that they're more calm, gentle drama kind of stories, which are just happen to be told in animation. And I think that that's what, again, we were talking about earlier with horror and some of your more original films. It's refreshing in that sense. Even if you're an animation fan, if you're very used to American animation, then go into anime, it's a completely different sort of like approach to it almost. And there's so many conventions of animation which are just not used at all. And that's why I found, especially, watching this, I was like, wow, I really found anime fascinating. As much as I don't like go to it like all the time, when I do go to it, I absolutely love it because you're just jumping into such a different world and such a different approach. It's kind of like going to another country almost, in that you're sort of seeing this different stylistic approach. Whereas I think other foreign cinemas, sometimes you're like, okay, well, they've got their approach, but there's still a lot of similarities, which I think the anime has just such a different style and feel to it, which is definitely evident in this film.
Absolutely. And it also brings in, we were talking about horror and how that's misaligned. And I think animation is misaligned as well, especially in our Western culture, because people sort of dismiss it as a kid's art form. And they did that a lot at the Oscars. All the jokes about animation were films that they could just sit their kids in front of, and in the category that was nominated for best animation included a documentary about a man fleeing war-torn country, and you're like, you wouldn't put your kids in front of that. And like I think anime is a good example of films that are, even though they're animation, they are made for an adult audience and a more mature audience, and they are treated with the same respect as a live action film would.
Yeah, that Oscars controversy has definitely come up a few times now. We've had so much focus on animation recently, isn't it? It just hurts even more every time. Like, oh,
especially considering when you think of some of the people who made the comments, and it's just like, it'd be nice if you made something decent before you criticize things as being for kids and not having quality.
Yeah. It's even the films that are kind of geared towards kids, even dismissing it as just kids stuff, fodder, is disrespectful to the animators at Pixar and Disney, who, like, for Encanto, which won this year, is still an impressive layered film that, even though it tracks the kids with the colors and the sound, it's got this message about generational trauma, and like one of the characters gets beheaded by a machete. If you watch it, if you're an adult watching it, obviously not graphically but off camera, like, gets brutally murdered, and it's all about the grief and generational trauma. And that's not kid stuff. Like, they can listen to the songs and be like, yeah, the family magical, but it dismisses thousands of animators that work on this film.
And I think that's what's fascinating with anime, is that, again, it's that approach. And even though it is easy to kind of go to Ghibli often, but I suppose it's the same way as we go to Disney when we're talking about animation so much, of like Lion King, etc. But you see it in sort of things like Your Name as well. And I think when I think of it in my head, I find it hard to kind of go like, oh yeah, that, potential children's film, Your Name, because I don't think there's anything really in there which you would go like, oh yeah, a child could quite happily enjoy this. I think, as we mentioned at the top, this is maybe more your teenagers, your adults, etc., which would enjoy it. But I think it still has an element here which kind of works, and what I think a lot of Japanese filmmakers have said that they want in their animated films, like Miyazaki, is that they want to treat children and viewers with respect and kind of show them the kind of like wonders of the natural world. I think they've kind of done it with maybe their Ghibli land or world, whatever they're calling it, the theme park they're opening in Japan. It's not about roller coasters. It's not about, there's no like big attractions there. There's no like kind of like merry-go-round or anything. It's just like sets, and like you get to go around a park and you get to go like inside a temple, because they're like, well, that's what the Ghibli experience is. And you kind of feel that here again. It's that anime aspect of like detail, the attention to detail, seeing, like just houses and parks, and it embraces Japanese culture so much. And I think that that's where you can tell when anime is kind of treating its viewers with respect by saying that, like, this is the feeling you get when you're by the ocean. This is the feeling you get when you're kind of waking up in the morning. Like, this one very much reminded me of those playlists you get on YouTube, which are often like chill out sort of playlists, and they've got like a girl there with a cat at the desk and that kind of stuff. It's like these are the kind of films that like inspire that almost, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. There's some things in this film that just take me back to being a teenager in a small town and finding like a little bit of forest that you and your mates can hang out with and eat snacks and listen to music.
I was going to say, which particular shots in IMAX did you find particularly striking? Because obviously I imagine that's going to have a distinct difference in the experience.
Oh, that's a good question, but it's going to be the most obvious answer here, right?
I mean, that's also fine. Yeah, obviously, I was hoping it would be the comets because I think
it's the comet, and every time you see it, it's just so breathtaking. But also the bit in the mountain, the mountain edge, when they finally meet and have that conversation, that whole moment, and then and I also find the animation in Tokyo so stunning and so so realistic, even though it's animation. I love the contrast between this busyness of Tokyo and then the small town that she lives in as well. But the comet's really special. When you see it on a 100-foot screen, it's so good.
It looks like such a simple shot, but in practicality, it's amazing how much detail they would have had to have put into it. Every single aspect of just making it look, because obviously that's going to be in some way computer generated, but making it actually blend in seamlessly with the rest of the environment, which is 2D. It's just gorgeous. But also, I think the other shot I would want to point out, I think as well, even though it is tonally drastically different from everything else in the film, is when he's basically psychologically being sent back, essentially in time, and basically you get all of the sort of usual trippy visuals. I think they did it in a particularly unique way for this film, just because a lot of the sort of lighter colors, sort of like purples and pinks, which you don't usually see with that sort of trippy sequence, which was a nice touch.
And I kind of respect again with the comet as well, is that it's not like you might see with other animations in which you're like, oh, that looks cool, or that takes over like the entire kind of film in that, or it's like clearly that's CGI and this is 2D, it doesn't match. I think that what works very well with the comet is that they make sure that the backgrounds and the characters and the settings all kind of blend in and match, in that sense that everything looks vivid and amazing, not just the comet. And I think that that's what's cool about, they've put so much attention to detail in all of the other landscapes and everything else that you see. You kind of get the feeling of like the crispness of the grass, the kind of like, dew on the leaves, the house that they're in. And it's a traditional thing with animation in general, but especially anime, like the food, it always looks delicious as well.
Yeah. I was just about to say some of my favorite scenes are when they're eating. I think there's a scene with her and her sister, and I really sticks in my mind because they're doing that traditional, they're weaving and eating, and it just feels very just well thought out kind of mise-en-scene kind of moment where you get to know them a little bit better, and then you get to see their culture a little bit better, and also the delicious food, which is insane. Like the animated food is just, in anime, is gorgeous.
Always looks so much better than actual food that will ever exist.
I know, and you try and replicate it, it's just never the same. Yeah,
no, definitely not.
They're more jealous of anime characters than when they're eating food.
Especially with Japanese foods, because I suppose there's a kind of like alien foreign nature to it of like, oh, what is this, like, a rice, is it like do they call them like donuts over there, or is that
no, they don't call them donuts?
That's what Pokemon does, they call them donuts. What are they actually, like rice cakes or something?
They're essentially just rice balls, but they do have a specific name. I cannot remember off the top of my head what that name is, but
even those, they look amazing and they're in this film, and I'm like, they always look really nice, but from what I've read or know, it's just boiled rice with like, some whatever, like middle. It's nothing like fantastic, but they always look so nice in animes. But yeah, I made the mistake of what Pokemon taught me as a child, which was those were donuts.
It's eggs. Any eggs in anime look so divine. And every time I make eggs, I'm like, this is not the same.
Yeah.
Anime.
Me and my friend once tried what we called a dish, I think when we were in school and we were like in between, it might have been like in Easter holidays or something like that. We made ponyo noodles, which is essentially trying to recreate the noodles and ham and eggs and stuff that they make in that Ghibli film. So again, similar thing. We were like, oh yeah, we'll just chuck a bunch of noodles with like a broth and put a fried egg in there and stuff like that. And again, it was the same thing of like, this just doesn't look the same, but effort appreciated. But yeah, I think, the visuals in this are amazing. And yeah, it's worth picking up on those specific moments. I'm trying to think if there's one for myself, apart from like you guys said with the comet. Is there anything else anyone could think of?
I guess we need to discuss the anime intro, because it's the sort of thing that made David ask me before this recording happened, was this inspired from something else? Because that basically came off as traditional sort of anime series opening.
Yeah, that whole like fade in and crossing over of characters and the whole like back to each other. I was like, oh wow, this is an actual like television anime turned into a film almost but it's not. And I think that, again, that helps, I think, with the escapism of having something different and new, but it also kind of adds to the high school, teenage vibes, and I think, as we'll get onto, with facts and stuff like that, it makes a lot of sense in terms of the music. I think it helps with the story as well, is that, again, that there's this kind of like fantastical nature to it, and there's this like otherworldly element of like what's happening, why is this body swap sort of thing happening, and the fact that there's like a tragedy sort of like there behind it kind of makes the sort of more vivid, clear stuff even more empowering, I guess, because then you later see when there's the realization of what's happened to the town with the comet, when you see like the close-ups when he goes to the lake and you see like the broken roads. I think that's a moment in which you can really see how anime can work on the two levels. It's not just like 3D animation, which can be like, wow, look how colorful and amazing that looks. I think that was one bit that really struck me, was when it had the close-ups of the broken road and the village also like in the water and everything like that. I was like, even these kind of dark, gritty kind of realistic moments really come through, because there's a realism to it almost, but a poetic realism, like in how visual it is.
Yeah, and they really do well, even though they don't focus on a lot of background characters, you kind of get the community of the town really well, that when you find out what happens to it, it's devastating, not just because of, even like her and her family is devastating enough, but because they've weaved such a beautiful culture of this town into it. That scene when you find out what's happened and he visits, it's devastating to find like all that loss of life.
Yeah, well, that's why I was thinking through this film. I'm not sure what your guys' experience was in terms of, again, the first time watching, because I kind of got halfway into it and I was like, oh, this is fun, because at the beginning I was like, right, body swap sort of thing, what can be so amazing about this? And, you do, I think it shows, it's testament how well the film is written and the story and the performances, because you are captivated by it. You have those fun moments of like, again, that shows the great animation that they're doing is when she's, in the boy's body and she's so like, walking around all so scrunched up and her hands held up high, and the characters are acknowledging, that's strange. They can be a bit more risque, I suppose, with this kind of story, as we said, because it's not, a straight up kids film or anything like that, because there's the moments in the school, etc., when he's, in her body and, he wakes up every morning feeling her breasts and stuff like that. And he has the moment with the skirt, to then have it be like half an hour in. I was like, right, how is this going to go on for like another an hour and 15 minutes? Because I was looking at the time ahead. I was like, I don't know how this is going to happen. So like you said, then that moment where like you realize about the town, then you're like, whoa, this entire film has completely changed. It really is a pivotal moment for the film in which you like, you really are then more captivated, and it completely changes the entire sort of narrative. It's kind of one of those, it's like almost like Lego movie of like everything is built up to that moment and then it completely changes everything you've seen in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, really handles the tonal shift really well. Like you said, it's probably why they start with this anime song, like TV show opening, because it feels very teenagery, very like this is what a boy would do if he was in a girl's body kind of thing. And then the tonal shift happens and it just becomes something more.
Yeah, you kind of feel like you're in a safe space with it, because I even saw some criticisms of people saying that they felt there was like tonally a bit over the place, or they felt that there was too much going on, which I can kind of see. There's so much that happens within it, but then I appreciate the visuals and how they handle all of it so well that I kind of excuse that.
I do think they just do it in sections, though, right? I don't think there's a significant overlap of any of the tones that they're going for. It's very much sort of establishing the relationship, and you get the hints that something might happen, because obviously they're doing incredibly nice things for each other, trying to progress their own lives. Then the shock reveal of, psych, you're 3 years apart and one of you is dead. And then obviously exploring all of the implications of that. And then you get the chaotic sort of finale of, oh, we have a chance to rectify this, we need to do something. So I wouldn't say it's all over the place. I think it paces itself out actually quite well. But then I often do argue with a lot of critics about their perceptions of, things with films and quality.
But it's funny that people would mention that, because tonal shifts are kind of my favorite thing in films. I really like dark. Well, that's why I like dark comedies, because the ability to shift between tones. Like there's a film called Blind Spotting that shifts in tone pretty much every other scene. It's like jovial, and then it's dark, and then it's that kind of thing. And even Parasite was so beautiful at doing that, and going from this outrageous, almost like comedy thing to this horror, to this comedy horror. And when people complain about like the tone was all over the place, I'm like, what tone do you want? Do you just want the same thing throughout? Because isn't that what storytelling is, that you're going to kind of go through the motions and the emotions, and it's going to change and develop, rather than I'm going into a comedy, that's all I want.
I mean, even the example that was mentioned earlier, I think people need to realize that something like The Lion King has tremendous tonal shifts. Yeah. You cannot literally have like, I just can't wait to be king going straight into an elephant graveyard. That is not the same tone.
Well, and the very famous death and then Hakuna Matata.
Yeah. Hell, even like Bambi has something like a death of a mother and then goes straight into a scene a couple of years later. La 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 la.
Yeah.
Shut up.
They like their stories to be maybe more detailed, and they don't like gaps. I think that's what's something I appreciate with this. And I think that's kind of like a Japanese anime approach as well, of kind of like, you don't have to explain everything. You don't have to tell everything. Like, I love that this film just ends the way it does, that there's just kind of that moment on the stairs. It doesn't have to wrap up everything in a bow or hairband, if you want to say it in that way. But I think that is the same when they're doing the body swap. It's not necessarily like you see every day that they are doing this. You kind of get an impression of generally what's happening. And the fact that even early on in the film, you're kind of confused as to be like, she comes into school and they're like, oh, you were really weird yesterday. And you were like, wait, did I miss something in the film? What are they talking about? And you're almost living that experience with them. And I guess the same thing with the characters. You almost follow her for the first half, and then you follow him. So the film purposely kind of like swaps and changes. And I guess it depends if that's your kind of jam. If you were like, nope, I like my films to be like A to B, and I want to see everything, and I don't want any gaps. It's quite often what I think Patrick Willems says in one of his video essays when he talks about plot holes. A lot of people mistake what a plot hole actually is, in which they're like, oh, how did Thor get from this place to this place in that film? It's a plot hole. It's like, it's not a plot hole. It's just that they haven't told you the answer, or just like they've left it to your imagination. A plot hole would be more like, it just didn't make sense. Like one moment the character said they were going to go here, and the script or the editing suggested otherwise. But often people will say plot holes are just things that they just haven't seen or have just been sort of left to our assumption, which is, a mistake to make, I think.
Yeah, and you're right in saying there's a beautiful ambiguity to this movie at the end. And I think modern film viewers, God, I'm generalizing. I'm really bashing modern film viewers today.
Nah, screw them, they're dicks.
You're all awful. You suck.
They're all Amy Schumers.
There is a loss of ambiguity. I know a lot of people who don't like ambiguity at all in their films. They have to be told straight away. Whereas I love the blissful grey area. Sometimes I don't. I don't know. Horiada's Shoplifters, for example, ends on a bittersweet grey area where you don't know who she's looking at, and you don't know what's going to happen to this little girl, and it breaks my heart every time I think about it. Whereas Your Name kind of ends in this really loving, bittersweet kind of, they don't really remember each other, because that's the caveat of their body swap, is that they forget over time. And when they see each other, they kind of know, but they don't know. And then it's that kind of, they've reunited, but will they ever remember, kind of bittersweetness to it, which I quite like. But yeah, there is a, like you said, some people misconstrue. And I did it myself recently. You mentioned that. I did it myself yesterday. I watched The Northman, and someone was like, what did you think? I was like, yeah, I liked it, but I wanted to know how he got from here to here. And they're like, but they didn't need that. And I was like, yes, I know. But he ends up getting the sword far too easily. And it's like, but we don't need to know that. We just want to see him like fight and and do like badass Northman things. And I'm like, yeah, I get the point, but sometimes I could be like, I want this explained to me.
Yeah, it depends what you want in the film and what your expectations are. It's like with The Northman, it's easy to see it as like, oh, it's this gritty, dark, historical piece. But then it's like, oh, well, the sword stuff is more of the kind of like mythic King Arthur stuff of like he just happens to stumble upon it kind of aspect. So it depends what expectation you go in with. And it's, again, like with Your Name, it's what we were saying earlier. It's that kind of, maybe the opening makes people think that they're going to get a more conventional, romantic, anime. But I think the visuals do really sell that kind of more supernatural element to it, which anime often does, and, the Japanese definitely do love their big themes and their kind of like science fiction, fantasy stuff almost. They're always sort of tying that in some ways. Not always, but I think here it is kind of like welcome.
Yeah.
Frankly, if the film ended with any other line rather than the line they ended on, I would be disappointed. I think it ends beautifully in that regard. The entire film called Your Name literally ends with the question, what's your name? Okay, so take those tapes and rewind them again because it's VHS Corner. So we've already talked about the comparisons that people would make if you mention the idea of anime, and they mention Studio Ghibli, they might also mention Hayao Miyazaki, as being the sort of dominant forces within anime. Well, it's actually nice to know that this was the first anime film not made by either of those institutions to gross 10 billion yen at the Japanese box office. So in US dollars, that would be about 98 million. And it's also the second highest grossing anime film before it got surpassed in 2020 by Demon Slayer the movie Mugen Train, which I think is particularly interesting given that that's obviously during COVID times and just... yeah, those glorious flashbacks. Okay, so just to talk a little bit then about the director, specifically talking about Makoto Shinkai. Specifically, there are a couple of references to one of his earlier works throughout this film consistently. So he worked on a previous film called The Garden of Words, and here are the ways in which he decides to directly link his film to that film. So the Italian restaurant where Taki was working is called, and this is where I'm going to butcher Italian, so I can't be called a hypocrite, Il Giardino del Parole, which is the Italian for The Garden of Words. And also the main character of that film, which is Yukari Yukino, ends up being the teacher for Mitsua's Japanese classical Japanese lessons in school, and also apparently her partner appears in a crowd near the end of the film. So he's constantly trying to link in those references. Is this a sign of a Japanese sort of cinematic universe? Probably not. That's me being funny. We've not mentioned the music too much, and I think that what I love about this film, and I often love about anime in general, are the beautiful rock insert songs. So the insert songs for this film were produced by a Japanese band called Radwimps, who worked closely with Makoto Shinkai, both on the script and the story, to make sure that they created as much complementary music for it as possible. And the process of them working together led to the initial script actually changing in a number of areas. And finally, I think it's fair to say that this film has had a lot of positive critical reception, right? So IMDb gives it a score of 8.4 out of 10. Rotten Tomatoes currently has it at about 98% for the critics and 94% for the audience. However, there is one person who is very vocal about their, I wouldn't say dislike for the film, but their disappointment in the film. And that actually is the writer-director Makoto Shinkai himself. Yeah, he actually thinks that this film is relatively incomplete and imbalanced due to a lot of time and budget constraints. So it's actually interesting to see how much somebody who has put in a lot of love and work into this film, and it's generally well accepted by people, he still has a lot that he would like changed about the film. And that's everything from VHS Corner for this week.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Craig. And yeah, it's kind of ironic. We kind of have circled back to what we were talking about at the start, Sarah, with writing. It's kind of like it never ends. And I guess with that, also it shows that the filmmaker is you're never going to be 100% happy, are you? And I suppose that's why a lot of filmmakers or actors even will say, oh, I don't revisit work, I don't go back, I don't look back, that kind of thing, because they might watch things and go, oh, I wish I did it that way, I wish this was changed. It's that kind of ever evolving progress and frustration, I guess, with art.
Absolutely. I mean, even Robert Eggers just recently came out and said he wished he could have gone back and done something different with The Witch. I think he wasn't a big fan of shooting it on digital and wanted it on film, and I wanted to have like practical effects. And that's again a film that people consider like a masterpiece. So for him to come out and be like, yeah, I'm not a big fan of it.
I think, potentially like we were saying about like the overlapping, maybe he feels like at the middle point, maybe he's like, oh, I had to keep the stories more aligned or something. Maybe he doesn't like the fact that it kind of then focuses more on the male character and it kind of slows down in that sense. But, again, I guess that, is then where the movie really changes, and maybe he wants the end to be a bit tighter. I don't know, but yeah, I think the artists themselves is always going to be the biggest critic, which is definitely interesting. But I think that obviously everyone else can come to it and kind of look at it fresh-eyed and go like, oh my god, this is so different. Whereas they're going to have so many things in their head that they went in with and what they wanted, and they might have not come out that way. But it's like what I often say to people, about. People will say like, oh, this film is trash, or this is terrible, or this, this is amazing, or people will come to love this film in years to come, etc. It's like, it's okay to just have like okay films, or, they don't either have to be like amazing or terrible. But also, I think that can come into, why you might like a certain film. You might say, well, I love this aspect of it. And even though you can acknowledge it's not a perfect film, there's something in there that really speaks to you, or which you just love. Like, oh, I love that action in it, or I love the visuals in it. So for something like Your Name, it can bring something to somebody that they weren't expecting to see, or that they really attached themselves to, which maybe even the filmmaker just didn't intend to have, or wasn't really that enthusiastic about. Because when you look at like how he came about this project, I was surprised that he came about in a way of like, oh, there was an earthquake in Japan, and I thought to myself, what if that happened to my town? And I was like, oh, I would have thought about all the story elements and all the kind of aspects to this film. I wouldn't think the kind of disaster element was actually like the original idea, if you know what I mean. Because to me, the kind of the comet and all of that, you would think that would come from like a piece of art or something. You wouldn't think like, what if this comet came down and destroyed a town? I didn't think that would be the original concept of the film. It doesn't seem like this is like the core idea. It seems like everything else around it. To me, the town being destroyed, even as beautiful and haunting as that is kind of a very small part of the film in a lot of ways. It's more about everything that happens around that and all the visuals around that. But yeah, look, I think also like, with the facts and stuff like that as well, what was good there is that, we're hearing about it's had such a positive response. I think that definitely goes hand in hand with its legacy and what you talked about there, Sarah, about the fact you got to see it on an IMAX screen, like you wouldn't get just any sort of like animated film put in an IMAX screening. But I think also in terms of like the approach that it's taken, I kind of really appreciate it as well, is just that the character beats and the kind of performances that they go with, the fact that the way the certain characters act, like towards the end when you've got like his friends, he's like, oh, don't worry, I'm covering you at work. And when like the sort of girl he fancies at work is with him, you can kind of, you instantly like sort of know her character from the interactions that you have with her. She's drawn and sort of dressed in a very specific way. And then like his friend, I think at one point when he's like, oh, he's acting different today, and like the friend is just like, oh, I thought they were kind of cute. And I was like, I kind of like that small touch, and that's throughout the film. And I think even with characters like the sister, the grandmother, it's all very like natural approaches to those characters, which I think lends itself with the kind of like focus the film has on like Japanese culture and stuff.
Such a shame that because I watched this film as it's intended to be watched in terms of the sub, they didn't provide any subs for the lyrics. So I thought they were beautiful, and I understood the tone that they were adding to every scene. I have literally no idea what they were singing.
True. Sarah, anything you would want to add on like the music, or like especially the rock stuff or the orchestral kind of moments?
There, I can't remember which point it is. I think it's halfway through, and it's mostly the score around the comet, and then both looking at the comet. And I think that piece of score made me well up alone. I think it's so beautifully done. Yeah, I read you, and I do love the contrast. As we said before, that the kind of opening sequence does set that kind of teenagery zone. It's not a tone to it.
And even the like lack of sound and music sometimes as well. Like the moment where, again, you know, major sort of spoiler, but when they do meet and they're like, let's write each other's names on our hands, and then you just get that like snap and she's gone and the pen falls to the floor. They don't, you know, they set that up in such an effective way of like, you think, oh, okay, yeah, you know what's going to happen. Then boom, and you're like, what? And you know, like the pen lands. And they do that a few times when they have those crossovers of just like, it happens and it happens right there.
For me, the most effective use of no music or limited sound as well was just at the end where she was running and just the fall. There's so much of that. It's just silent and then just like the thudding. Just that sense of just absolute panic that you get just watching, knowing she needs to get away and just going, get up!
Yeah. Yeah. I love the scene, the whole scene where she's trying to get the town, the kids, and they're just like, this happens, like, honestly, this is going to happen. And just no one listens to them because they're teenagers.
That's the last thing I would sort of say, though, on like the culture and everything. And it kind of ties in, I think, to the legacy, is that I think it does really capture, again, as other films have. I think the grandmother plays like a really important role here, and she is really the gateway to the kind of like fantasy element, and the fact that she is there as the kind of like wise old sage of like describing these elements that they're talking about. I can't remember exactly the name for it. I don't know if either you guys remember, but when she's talking about it's the things that are happening at once and the, you know, the energies.
Is it Mushibi?
I thought it was something with K, like Kiase or something like that. But when she's describing that, and like you said, Sarah, earlier, like when they're going through the forest and stuff, all of that is so visual. But when she's describing as well, I love that when she's talking about why we have to embrace our heritage and like the old ways and kind of like bring that forward and show that to people, because, you know, it can't be forgotten, because there's kind of like memories, you know, which are stored within these processes. And I think that that's also as fascinating about like anime and Japanese culture, that they really embrace their kind of their past and their kind of like, you know, the fact that they got these temples, and, you know, they think about like the legacy of like, you know, looking after your elders and using these old techniques of like, you know, eating still with chopsticks and having your kind of like places to kind of like meditate and to old crafts, you know, things like samurai or whatever. But in this film, they've got the weaving and everything like that. All of it feels very like raw and kind of like spiritual. And I think that the grandmother character is a great, you know, symbol of that. But it also is a great symbol of like the Japanese culture. And I think that that's why this film does really strike a chord with a lot of people, because they really go, wow, I want to visit Japan. I want to go to Tokyo, etc.
Absolutely. And I don't think we've spoken about it enough that it's not just body swapping. They swap over time. So there's that wonderful kind of correlation. The grandmother talks about the past a lot and keeping a thread to the past. And that's kind of like what connects these two together, is that kind of that ribbon sequence and things that makes these two people swap bodies, not just across the country, but across time as well, which I think is so beautifully done, because that could have been really badly mismanaged.
I definitely agree, although correct me if I'm wrong, but there's definitely a scene when, you know, when he's having basically all of the flashbacks of memories after he's just drunk in the sake, and it shows her being born, and there's definitely a snip, and at first I thought that was an umbilical cord, and I was like, really? Oh God, please no. But in hindsight, I think it was ribbons.
An effective way to sort of tell the story with the father and everything. And again, I think there was an element of fantasy, you know, element with what the mother was saying, passing on the power, all of that kind of stuff, which is interesting. Well, we'll go on to then the legacy of this film, again, by talking about whether Your Name from 2016 deserves to be remembered for all time and gain the honor of a place in our movie vault. So, Sarah, what do you think? Should Your Name be remembered in the movie vault? Do you think it deserves to go in there, and for what reasons? If you think it does,
yes, it does. I think, it's culturally significant for animated film of recent years that has translated across the globe. It's an astonishing, unique story, and it feels just as good and poignant as live action, even more so. I think, I think it's just wonderful, and a treat, and it needs to be visited by all.
Craig?
I think Sarah said yes enough for me.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that it's visually extraordinary. It's, like I said, these type of films fascinate me. And I think that, as you said earlier as well, Sarah, if it's a good way of saying, what's another example of anime apart from, your go-to studios or films, then, this is a fantastic example of that, but also a modern movie, one from the past few years, and one that tells quite an interesting weaving and changing story. So, and one which has, a lot of heart and important messages at the center as well. So, yep, into the movie this week goes Your Name from 2016.
We're in the Endgame now.
Okay, Endgame time. So this is a game called Your Name's the Name, Endgame's the Game. I'm not sorry. I'm sorry. So basically, I love the concept of Your Name so much insofar as characters being able to body swap across time and across distance. Now, I decided I was going to play around with the format. So what I've done is I've taken several different movie characters from across films, genres, franchises, and I've basically body swapped. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the sort of POV description of one character, one movie character, who's been put in the body of another character. And from this POV description, I want you to try and guess, fastest first, which two movie characters they are. So basically, which character has been put in the body of whichever character. I want to stress heavily, I've used the phrase movie characters because they might not all be human.
Okay.
I think this is the first time I've described a game and the contestant has looked traumatized. Are you okay, Sarah?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just can sense myself failing so badly at this.
Don't worry, I am not got a good track record with these either.
There's only 3 scenarios that I've made. So essentially this is going to be a best of 3. As is probably obvious, this is going to be a one-on-one battle between David and Sarah. What you'll be playing for specifically is the idea of which film we discuss next week. So usually it would be a case of the guest will have a choice between mine and David's films. But this time it's completely different. It's a face the host insofar as if David wins, his choice will be the one that we discuss. If Sarah wins, it'll be Sarah's choice. Before we get into the game, I'd like to have a little preview of what films you'll be looking to submit. So David.
So my film, it looks at the idea that we've had in Your Name of kind of like flipping between sort of different storylines, different worlds, elements of the fantastical, but then there being a very grim and dark reality to it, but it's still in kind of what is expected to be a bright, bubbly kind of story. You're also focusing on my film, like a kind of lead female character. This one is from 2015, so still quite modern. And yeah, I think just the fact that recently, as we mentioned, we've had so many like favorites and famous movies to me, especially because this came from an animation background. So it's a live action film, but the kind of director is known for animation. This was more of a failure and, is quite problematic. So I kind of want to get, deep diving into sort of a more failed film and kind of explore what happened. Where did it go wrong?
Okay, interesting. Sarah, let's hear about yours.
So mine's a 1971 film. It blends aspects of Your Name with a topic that I spoke very heavily at the beginning with, and that's where I'm going to lead you. But that's my hint. I spoke a lot about this kind of sub-genre, and I think this is a perfect balance between that and Your Name.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so this is going to be best of 3. This is going to be fastest first. To indicate that you have your answer must include both movie characters. So if you get one of the characters right, but you get the other one wrong, the round will continue until I finished all of the clues.
Okay.
To indicate that you wish to answer, and this is why I didn't want David to make the joke earlier, make it confusing. I want you to say the words, my name.
Okay.
Okay, so let's test it. David,
My name.
Sarah.
My name.
Fantastic. I wouldn't have done that usually. It's just he made me. He literally put me into it by psyching me out at the beginning. Okay. Are we ready for scenario number 1?
Hopefully.
Yes.
All of these are from the perspective of this person or character has just woken up.
Right.
Okay. I'm not going to do any accents or anything like that, but I'll do my best to sort of embody character where I can. Oh. Hang on. I don't remember traveling to this place. I don't remember getting in the car. Like, usually whenever we go into the future, we're in the car, but we're somewhere else. Is Doc around? I don't know. Wait, what am I wearing? When did I change into pajamas? This weird looking pajamas. Although nice. Nice color. I just wish I could find my jacket. This vehicle's like nothing I've ever seen. It's so futuristic. I don't get it. Just hang on. What's this on my belt? Whoa! I don't want that. That's dangerous. That feels
My
really
name.
hot. Sarah?
Is it Marty McFly and Luke Skywalker?
I'm looking for the answers. Is it Marty McFly and Luke Skywalker?
I was like, Marty McFly and Batman? And I was like, but the futuristic thing did throw me.
Yeah.
So yeah, well done.
Excellent. So that is 1 point to Sarah. Scenario number 2. Ah, where is it? Where is it? I can't let it get to me. I need to protect myself. Oh God, where is everyone? Where is everyone? Where's Jonesy? Hang on. This isn't my voice. This is. I don't know what this accent is. It sounds partly Asian, partly European. Also it sounds like a man's. Wait, where am I? This is a house. Am I home? Did my mission end? Did I no longer have to do those missions? Hang on, this doesn't look right. Oh, no, I can't be home. These look like spacesuits. Wait, no. Wait, are they spacesuits? No, they look more like fancy dress costumes. Just lots of different colors and symbols. Wait, these are superhero costumes, aren't they? They look like hero costumes. Although there's something that feels like there's missing about them. I don't know. They look so streamlined. They don't look expansive. They seem to be missing fabric. Wait, also, how short am I? This doesn't make any sense. And those are
My
all
name.
the clues. Sarah?
Is it Ellen Ripley and Scott Lang?
Is it Ripley?
Oh.
Is it Scott Lang? So, David, you have a chance here. Oh, so you can have multiple guesses.
Do I still have to say?
Yeah, you would still have to say my name. Because there's a chance that thinking about it. So think about what do we know so far?
They're short. Your name? My name?
I knew you'd screw it up once. David?
Shang-Chi?
It's not Shang-Chi. So they've got a weirdish sounding accent. They're short. In their house, they seem to have a lot of superhero costumes, but something's missing.
My name?
David?
Edna Mode?
Oh, of course it is.
No capes.
Presumably, you
Okay.
need to say who's going in to get the full point.
So it would be
laugh if you get this wrong.
Ellen Ripley going into Ender mode.
Yeah, okay, so that is a point to David.
Oh, could that be split though? Because Sarah did give me that.
I did say the rules were clear. You had to give me both characters.
Okay.
So the goal is getting them to be both at the same time.
So I might help you later, Sarah.
We now come to number 3, and this is my personal favorite.
I appreciate the sound effects as well.
I mean, sometimes it's necessary. Oh, I appear to be sleeping on the floor. That's rather unusual. I don't remember having that much to drink with my dinner last night, but what's that I can hear? I seem to be able to hear much further than I could before. I see they're discussing one of my finest favorite composers. I wonder if they're discussing his 5th or his 9th. Wait a minute. What's that I can taste? That's I can taste chicken, beef, and it's not the kind of liver that I had last night. Wait a minute. There seems to be lots of brown, black, and white hair on the floor. Was this from one of my victims or several? Or this can't be from me, can it?
My name.
Sarah?
Is it Hannibal Lecter and Beethoven, the dog?
Is it Hannibal Lecter? Is it Beethoven? Yes.
Oh.
Yep. I genuinely put the mind of Hannibal Lecter into Beethoven the dog.
It was like, which dog is it? I was like, is it Doug from Up or something? I was just trying to think of famous dogs. I was like...
And you didn't think of the music reference talking about the 5th and the 9th.
I just thought that was Hannibal being like, I like...
What a snob.
Yeah.
So with 2 to 3, 2 to 1, that means that Sarah is the winner.
Hey.
Congratulations on winning your first Endgame, especially considering that you thought that you weren't going to do well at this.
Yes, yeah.
Well
Yeah, I'm
done.
quite pleased with myself.
No, it was a fantastic effort. I didn't expect people to instantly get Hannibal Lecter and Beethoven.
Yeah, it's interesting. I got Beethoven before I got Hannibal, and I should have gotten Hannibal. Hannibal, like Silence of the Lambs, is my second favorite film,
Yeah.
and I should have gotten it when you said liver.
Yeah.
But when you said victims, I was like, oh.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think the liver is... I was thinking Hannibal before Beethoven, definitely.
Yeah, I was going to put a Chianti, but I thought that might be a bit too obvious, so I thought I'd leave it off a bit. But so yeah, fantastic. Congratulations on winning this Endgame. So as promised, you now get to choose the film that we'll be discussing in the next episode. So lead us in. What are we in for next week?
Amazing. So you were in for a Hammer horror film.
Yeah.
A Hammer horror film from 1971, directed by Roy Ward Baker, and it revolves around Dr. Henry Jekyll, who dedicates his life to curing all known illnesses. However, he starts procuring his ingredients quite nefariously, especially from the women of Whitechapel. And when he injects himself with this concoction, he turns into a beautiful but evil woman. I am going to get you to watch Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde.
Okay.
Oh, interesting. So yeah, I've just searched up now to see where you could catch it. I guess it's mainly like a rental or like physical media kind of one, being from the 70s, which is often the case with the physical media, especially older movies, especially Hammer horror. Awesome. Well, yeah, and that was definitely a trip I enjoyed when I got to talk about Dracula and stuff on the podcast. So as soon as you mentioned that, I was like, is Peter Cushing in it?
It's very interesting. It plays fast and loose with the lore of Jekyll and Hyde, because it blends in historical events such as Burke and Hare and Jack the Ripper. But I find it really well done. And obviously it's another gender flip kind of construct.
Before the concept was even trolled about, I guess.
Well, the fact that they're both there as well, I suppose, is, it's still the fact that it's kind of like, your name in that sense as well, isn't it? So that's quite a cool connection. Awesome. Yeah. So, so everyone at home, try and find Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde however you can, whether it be through rental or physical media, online, and join in the conversation with us next time. So watch along at home so you can experience the craziness. Or if you've watched it before, like Sarah, then go revisit it and join us, as I'm sure Sarah will be looking forward to what we have in store for our guests and us talking all about it. It's definitely going to be a fun one with that. Yeah, well, thanks, Sarah. That's going to be a fun one in the next episode. So, well, that wraps up this one. Congratulations on your Endgame win as well. Can you just tell us as well where the people can find you and more about some of the projects you're working on and where on the socials you are?
You can find me at Cookie End Screen on Twitter, Instagram, and everywhere. You can find my articles on Film Stories and Hey You Guys, most predominantly. And I'll be doing some work for the UK Jewish Film Festival. I also writing a book. Well, I've just finished writing a book, a fiction book. So hopefully, maybe one day you'll get to read a fictional story that I wrote.
That would be definitely fun. That would be a first for the podcast. It's just been like, oh, we got like a book that we got from. We've had educational material, but not fictional stories. So that would be a good one to come from one of our guests. So yeah. Awesome. Go check out all of those articles. Go visit the Royal Albert Hall as well. You'd be like, I know the person who did the marketing for this.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Always go visit Royal Albert Hall. I love the Victorians, and that's a proper Victorian venue.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you again, Sarah, for joining us. We hope you can join us again in the future. Anything lastly from yourself, Craig?
I'm sorry, but what is your name?
What's your name?
What's your name?
It's going to be like the new What's Up. It's just like, what's your name? What's your name?
So, okay, awesome. Well, catch Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde for our next one, and we'll catch you in the next episode. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ta-ta now.
To keep up with the latest episodes of Well Good Movies, you can listen to us on all your usual podcast outlets, including Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, and more. Don't forget to follow us, subscribe, and rate us where you can to keep our podcast growing. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Well Good Movies to keep up with the latest news and highlights from all our episodes, as well as tell us what movies you want to be discussed in the future. And if all of that isn't enough, you can also find us at our website, freshtakehub.com/wellgoodmovies, where you can catch all our episodes along with videos and articles deep diving into the worlds of film and television. So what are you waiting for? Go check out the film we'll be discussing in next time's episode.